Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Good afternoon.
Good evening, Professor. Good evening, everyone.
Thanks, Johnny. Good evening. In a couple of weeks, we'll have. I'm just commenting on. I have a window next to me, but I have a shade, and the light is done for Johnny. Always has light behind them, right? Oh, can people hear me? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, Magdalene.
Hi, Professor. How you doing? I'm sorry now. I'm so sorry now because I have to connect from my phone.
Right.
Because I'm not in my house. I'm in my new home.
Oh.
So I have to come to New Jersey because they're still working in here.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I made it on time because I got it made before 5:30 and then I made it.
Well, thank you for making the effort.
Yeah. Welcome.
That little swipe looked nice, right? That's one of the crazy things about Zoom that we that normally we would never see somebody's home, but we get to see each other's home.
I'm gonna show you a little bit. I'm gonna move on Saturday. I'm sorry to cut up. This is I'm gonna move on.
We can have class in your house.
Yes. Look at that. Let me do this. Hold on.
That's great.
Nice, right? I'm gonna take 2 minutes from you. Okay, look.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
I'm jealous.
Oh, my house is your house.
Okay, there you go, everybody.
Okay, let's start. Sorry, thank you.
Cool. So we have to go to Jersey though, so that means we might have
to. It's close. It's in Hackensack. It's right here, Hackensack.
We'll take a train and then we'll see what side of the train you sit on. Do you know that? That's a reference.
I take the you see they have on 179, they have a bus station, a little bus, they call La Voladora, whatever. I have this one, I have a New Jersey Transit, and I have another one who goes to 42nd and Express one. I have a lot of transportation here.
Well, good. Let me let some more students in the classroom and we'll rock and roll.
Sure.
Thanks, everybody. So I know I said I was going to send a link for you to do. Nobody's like, where's the link, Professor, to put up the cathedral ending? So it's okay. You got a break. If you didn't do it, it's okay. So what I want to do is I want to begin with that. So the short story was Cathedral, and I talked about the ending, and we started talking about it a little bit in class. But what do people think happened at the end of Cathedral? You want to speak, Mason? Go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, I believe the wife, his name is Bo. How they say that? It's Bo or Bo?
Oh no, the
wife husband.
I don't think the wife has the husband. He calls him Bub, but that's just
Bob.
it just means like it's not really his name. But
it's like when you call friends,
like dude, or like that kind of.
Yeah, right. So I believe after that he's gonna become a different person, more secure. He gonna start probably judging people like because that person was blind. He thought that he was not a normal human. Yeah, I believe he's gonna start having more confidence in himself because he wasn't confident. He wasn't that confident.
We're going to talk about him in a minute, but in the class.
Yeah, and maybe they're gonna be more happy, and also they're gonna become really good friends. All of them.
Okay. All right. What about other folks? Thanks, Majin. What about other folks? What do you make of the ending?
I would say about the narrator, hopefully he becomes less blunt and he starts seeing life in a more sensitive way, because he was not sensitive, not even towards his wife or towards his wife friend. and he's able to start seeing life in a different way, to actually start seeing life, because I think he was more blind than the blind.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah.
What about everybody else? Let me pick up on what the last thing that Johanny said about, seeing life and thinking in a way that he was more blind. And that's one of the motifs and one of the metaphors in it. A motif is something that gets repeated throughout the story, right? That's what a motif is. It's something like a concept that comes back. And in this story, what keeps coming up is the concept of seeing, right? Like the blind man is blind, but yet he has more insight, right, to human beings and human capacity, right? Yes, Johnny.
I just had a thought and an imagination from the story that came to my eye. I think that when he was drawing with Robert, when he was guiding Robert, and he was able to see life through Robert's, the way Robert would see life, and that will be the breakthrough that he needed for him to be, in order for him to make the change.
Yeah, so that ending, right? Again, we're playing with the idea of seeing and not seeing. And I wrote the word motif, so you can see how it's spelled in the chat. But definitely, yes. I mean, that's one of the things that you see throughout this whole thing, right? That throughout this whole story, first of all, there's a blind man coming to visit them, right? So the blind man technically can't see, but the blind man can see, right? He can see things that we can't see. He uses his other senses to see, right? And then there's our narrator, right? Who doesn't have a name, but the blind man calls him Bub, look just like, hey, dude, or hey, buddy, or something like that. But it's a term of endearment, meaning a term like de cariño, right? A caring term, a term that that's about connecting. I apologize. I'm getting a text from the chair of my department. So yeah, I have to do something after class tonight for the department. So but it's this idea of seeing, right? Like, how do we see? Like, what do we use to see? How do you have insight, right? Between seeing and how do you use your eyes? And yeah, there is something about that ending, right? Because at the very end, and we'll read the ending, and then this is weird. We're starting with the ending of the story, and then we'll go back to the beginning, right? But it's this ending is like he's if you remember, and we'll read it in a moment, they're doing the cathedral together. He says, close your eyes. Clay tells him, close your eyes. And he's there, he's closing his eyes, and he's continuing to draw. And he goes, now he really something. And he says, what he can open his eyes, but he kept his eyes closed. And it said that he was there, but he was somewhere else. Right. So that gives you, like, very quickly at the ending, this climax that happens, right? There's this change that happens between the character, and it has to do with sight, right? And it has to do with sight, and it has to do with insight. And I think one of the magical things and the powerful things of the story is taught. Some professors at also like, I'm not teaching that story. I'm tired of teaching that story, right? And I haven't gotten tired of teaching the story yet, because I think it's a story that at first you might be thinking, like, what is going on here? Like, nothing's really happening, right? And except this guy who, now we're gonna rewind. We'll go through the PowerPoint so we can get a sense of it. There's this guy, this protagonist that I think that Johnny was being diplomatic. Johnny was being diplomatic by calling him blunt, right? This main character, I'm not going to be diplomatic, and like, he was an asshole, right? He was just a pain. He was just like, what? Like, he was.
I didn't want to use that either on the paper or in class.
Right, you don't use it. You don't use it. I'm using it just to connect, right? We know blunt is a much better word to use to describe him, because we got it, right? We got that he was just like, like harsh, crass, like yes, you totally want to strangle him. You want to strangle this guy. And there's a moment, maybe we'll see if I can read that part. you know, when his wife does that, this when she's cutting the potatoes and one falls on the floor and she has a knife and you're like, you know, she wants to stick him with that knife or smack him with it or something. But these characters are just are very interesting characters, and it's a story that kind of I feel sneaks up on you a little bit. So let me share my screen and oops, here. So we can just kind of go through it so that I remember, so that I at least cover all the points that I want to cover. Okay. Here with Cathedral from the beginning. We get, all right, I'll make us a little smaller. All right, and here. Right, so here's the Cathedral. And so it's written by Raymond Carver, and he's a poet and a short story writer. He was married. I put this here. He was married and the father of two before he was 20 years old, right? So by the time he was 19, he was already married and had two kids. He had a bunch of jobs, like he says, picked tulips, pumped gas, he swept hospital hallways, corridors, swabbed toilets, and managed an apartment complex. According to Bruce Weber in the New York Times, that was a profile on the author. So not coincidentally, of all the writers at work today, Carver may have had the most distinct vision of the working class. So he grew up as a working class person, right? He was a father very young. He had to do lots of jobs to keep his family together, from cleaning toilets to, you know, whatever he needed to get done. But he did get a chance to go to college, and then he earned his BA and then went on to the Iowa's Writers Workshop, which is a very competitive workshop to get into. And you do get a master's, you know, that's a master's program to your master's in fiction or in creative writing. His first wife, you know, had jobs as well to support him as he began writing. And he eventually published a short story collection, said, "Will you please be quiet, please?" in 1976. Then What We Talk About When We Talk About Love in 81. And then Cathedral, which is the name of the story, but it was also the name of the whole story collection from 1983. And he published poetry collections as well. So, so he did both short stories, and he's known as a short story writer, right? Certain people like Isabel Allende might be able to write short stories, but she's known as a novelist. And there are certain writers like Raymond Carver, like Grace Paley, like one other one that Flannery O'Connor, that really excelled and did a powerful job at writing short stories. So he began drinking a lot in 1967, and he was hospitalized for alcoholism in the 70s. So it wasn't just that he would drink and get drunk, it became a problem for him. But he continued to write short stories, which is interesting because we noted in the last class that one of the things his characters do in this story is drink a lot, right? So after conquering his drinking problem in the 70s, he taught for several years in El Paso and at Syracuse, which is in upstate New York. And in 1983, he won a literary award for his generous, and his stipend freed him to write again. And if you notice in the previous slide that a lot of his, I'm going to go to the previous slide, a lot of his short story collections, the first one was in the 70s when he was, was in the 70s when he was still battling in the early 80s. And then the latter ones were after he cleaned up and got sober. He's known as a writer who introduced the minimalist style to American fiction in the 1970s. And minimalist style, we'll look at it. We'll look at how he writes, right? He writes most of his sentences are very short, right? There's not a whole lot of description happening in his work. It's very minimalist, you know? And so I think that also had to do with the fact that he was a poet, and poets very often work with being constricted and being, and doing more with less, right? And he's introducing readers to the world of desperation of ordinary people. I love this quote. He goes, "He created tales that are brief, but by no means stark." That means like missing something that's so brief that it's missing, you know, things are missing. Jeffrey Wolf said this in his New York Times book review. And And they said they imply the complexities of action and motive, and they're especially artful in their suggestion of repressed violence. No human blood is shed in any of these stories, yet almost all of them hold a promise of mayhem, some final, awful breaking from confines and breakthrough to liberty, right? So that's what's some more of him. Of the 1984 collection called Cathedral, which is based on from which the story we're reading comes from, it would be hard to imagine a more dispirited assortment of figures, declared David Lehman, right? In each story, a note of transcendent indifference beyond resignation or fatigue is sounded. Fun to read, they're not, right? So it's saying they're not necessarily fun to read. Although I beg to differ. And then Paul Gray, writing about Cathedral in Time, said the carver's art masquerades as accident, scraps of information that might have been overheard at the supermarket checkout by the local beer joint. His most memorable people live on the edge of poverty, alcohol self-destruction, and loneliness. Something in their lives denies them a sense of community. They feel this lack intensely, yet are too weary of intimacy to touch other people, even with language. Right? And that's certainly evident in this story with our protagonist. So here we go. We have the narrator, right? And I'm giving you some ideas. He's ignorant, he's rude, he's jealous. He's not necessarily a sweet guy. He's insensitive, he's closed-minded, he's insecure. Does anybody want to add to, to this? You can just unmute yourself and put it in the chat. You're all in agreement. All right. If you come up with any other ones, that's how this list grew from all of you, from my students over the years. Okay, then we got Robert. He's open-minded, he's nice, he's lonely, he's caring, insightful, he's blind, he's friendly, he's wise, right? Then we have the wife, who's also caring and lovely. She's a writer, right? She writes poetry. She's tough and strong-willed. And yeah, that's what we have, right? And then the themes in Cathedral, right? We have ideas, an idea of an epiphany, right? That's what a realization, opening his eyes to the mind, his eyes and mind to the world and surroundings, right? We have jealousy as a theme. The narrator feels for the blind man a certain amount of jealousy for him. Empathy, understanding how another person feels, connects to their feelings. Listening, how characters communicate and listen. Cynicism or sarcasm from the perspective of the narrator, a husband, and the theme of insecurity. So I'm gonna just throwing these themes on the wall, right? Can you still hear me or no?
Can't hear you, Professor.
You can't hear me?
Now we can. Now.
No. All right. But did you see all those themes that I listed?
Professor, yes. Can you please go to the first slide when you're describing the narrator, Robert? Second. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll go back to the PowerPoint in a second. But just talking about some of those themes of jealousy, right? Do you see the jealousy in there with the narrator? He's jealous of the blind man, right? Do you think he has a right to be jealous?
He has a jealousy from her past as well.
Right.
From her first husband. And yes, there's jealousy in there from him, the way he talks about her past and the way he talks about her friendship with him. He feels isolated. He feels that he's pushed to the side from that friendship. Mm-hmm. And there's a ring between them two, and he cannot go in. Right. He doesn't express it to her or to him, like he says that, but he feels that way.
Do any of you feel like it's justified that he has a right to be jealous?
I also sense that he was. I don't think so. I think that he shouldn't be jealous because the friendship was before he even came into the picture.
That's Ninoshka speaking? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Hey.
Right.
Yeah,
well,
I also sense that he wasn't only jealous of the wife, but I think he was, I mean, this is a sense I got from reading it. He was jealous of the blind man because he had this image of this blind man, like can't do anything. And this man has done so much in his life. And he expressed, and they're talking together with the wife and things like that. So, and I felt actually bad for the narrator because it felt like he hasn't done anything with his life except being in the service. And then here you have this blind man who has gone all over the world.
Yeah, there is, you know, what we're touching upon in a way, you know, the narrator could, I mean, sometimes it's hard to say sympathy, but maybe you could have a little bit of sympathy for him. But I think there is the sense of there's a phrase that it's an English American phrase that's called a poor dear. That means somebody that you almost have pity for because they're just, you know, there's like I don't know if I don't know if Dominicans say this as well, but Puerto Ricans say it a lot, like bendito, like, you know, like, and bendito means blessed, but the connotation is like you feel sorry, somebody you feel sorry for. But so there's a little bit of that, and there is this sense of like, yeah, he could feel a little justified. I mean, the wife had this intimate experience with him. Do you remember when she used to work for him? Yes, he touches her face. That's like intense. You know what I mean? To touch somebody's face.
And then she writes a poem about it.
Hello, right? So there's like justification.
He tries to justify it. The narrator tries to justify it when he says the part that when she was listening to a tape, his name came up or something, or she was recording a tape or talking to him, his name came up, but then he didn't. He heard the name from a stranger that he did not know about. So I wonder what they was talking about you know, what they were saying about me.
Is that why you raised your hand, or was there something else you wanted to say?
Yeah, I think it's justified the reason why he feels jealous.
Yeah. So we got all that. We got all that going on, right? This idea of jealousies inside of here. There's the insecurity, right, of the situation. And then, you know, there's the sense of a realization, right? So there's a phrase, there's a line called an epiphany, right? An epiphany is when suddenly you realize something, right? It's like, oh goodness, something you weren't aware of, and suddenly you become aware of it, right? And epiphanies are usually not just like something like, oh, you know, I didn't think I liked ginger ale, now I like it. You know, that's, you know, that could be, some people could argue that would be an epiphany, but epiphany is usually something that changes, that could be life-changing, right? Like an epiphany is like a realization that, you know, an epiphany is a word they use very often in like religious language, like, you know, you have epiphanies, right? And so the ending of this story is considered, they have a phrase called an epiphanic ending, right? The word epiphany, but like belonging to an epiphanic ending. And this is a style that happens in short stories, right? Where a character might be going through something or stuff, and then at the end, it's like the light opens up, right? Like something becomes transformative, right? And so this story I love because it does have an epiphanic ending, and it does it in such a way that sometimes it's very unassuming, right? The story's vibrating at this kind of almost monotonous level, if you know, and then suddenly at the end it escalates, and then it's like, and then it ends. And it's almost like a little ending that you're like, for a minute, when you first, well, anyway, I'll just say, when I first experienced it, I was like, what? Let me read this again. And then I was like, oh, and then as I read the story again, it became like the ending becomes, you know, more powerful, right? So let me go back to the PowerPoint and show you all what you may have missed. Hopefully you might think and freeze and let's go back here. Let's close one thing. Open another. PowerPoint closed. Let me open up. Open. Okay. Share screen. I've done that, I'm sure, in this class that I think my screen is being shared. And, it's not. All right, so we have the narrator, right? These are like kind of character descriptions. So I'm going to pause at this and stop. These are the character descriptions that you can certainly add to this. There's more to it. The wife was caring. She was a writer. You know, she's strong-willed. She also has a troubled past, right? But she was suicidal, and that's when she began writing poetry, right? She was married before. So this is her second marriage. So there's a lot more you can add to it. This is one lens that you could write an essay. You can do a character study of the three characters in the Cathedral. You've got a narrator, you've got the, Bub, Robert, and you've got the wife. So you could, that's one way you could look at this. Let's see the other parts of it. So we talked about these themes, right, of realization, of jealousy, the idea of empathy, rather, I said jealousy, jealousy, and empathy. Empathy is when you have an understanding of how another person feels. And that's another thing, that you connect to how they're feeling, you connect to their experience, right? And so that's what happens in this story at the end, right? There's not only is it epiphanic, but you can say it's empathic. Like the ending, he is able to connect to this blind man that he was purposely trying to push away, right? He was jealous of him. He didn't understand him. He was uncomfortable being around him. And then toward the end, they kind of have this very intimate experience with each other. Listening, right? There's a lot of ways how the characters communicate. The blind man has to listen because he can't see with his eyes. He could see in a way, he can imagine things with his other senses. He has an experience. Then the cynicism and sarcasm comes from the husband. An example is, I'll tell you in a second, and then themes of insecurity also with the husband. So here, what is the story about? These are some themes. The difference between looking and seeing, right? In Cathedral, the act of looking is related to physical vision, but the act of seeing requires deeper levels of engagement. The narrator shows that he is fully capable of looking. He looks at his house, his wife, and he looks at Robert when he arrives. The narrator is not blind and immediately assumes that he's therefore superior to Robert. Now, Robert's blindness, narrator reasons, makes him unable to make a woman happy, let alone have any kind of normal life. The narrator is certain that the ability to see is everything and puts no effort into seeing anything beyond the surface, which is undoubtedly why he doesn't really know his wife very well. Robert, however, has the ability to see on a much deeper level than the narrator, right? That's insight. Art is insight. The narrator and his wife and Robert find insight and meaning in their experiences through poetry, drawing, and storytelling, right? The wife through her poetry, according to the narrator, his wife writes a couple of poems every year to mark events that were important in her life, including the time Robert touched her face. The narrator gains insight into his own life when he draws a picture of a cathedral with Robert, realizing for the first time that looking inward is a way to gain greater knowledge and a deeper understanding of himself. Robert too gleans insight from drawing. So both of them, so the poetry, the written is the wife, and then the drawing, right, through art, during the cathedral, both Robert and the narrator gain insight. And I talked about a motif. So a motif is a symbolic image or an idea that appears frequently in the story. Motifs can be symbols, they can be sounds, actions, ideas, or words. So motifs strengthen a story by adding images and ideas to the theme present throughout the narrative. Motif and theme. In the literary work, a motif can be seen as an image. It repeats all that, right? And in this case, it's the idea of seeing, right? The concept of seeing. So it could be, motif could be in a theme, or motif could be, in a symbol, right? Sometimes motifs are mistakenly identified as examples of symbols. Symbols are images, ideas, sounds, or words that represent something else and help to understand an idea or a thing. Motifs, on the other hand, are images, ideas, sounds, and words that explain the central idea of the literary work, right? The theme. So in this story, a motif and symbol, a major symbol is a cathedral, and a major motif, in addition to the idea of seeing, is drinking and alcohol. I'm going to stop sharing for a minute so we can talk a little bit more about that. Right, so the idea of a motif in this, what is a cathedral?
A place of worship.
Place of worship, right? And usually a place where people come together to worship, right? So that's a cathedral. and he's literally drawing cathedrals. Cathedrals are also spiritual places. People can have a spiritual experience in a cathedral. And cathedrals, another word for cathedrals, well, cathedrals are big ones, right? A big grand ones, but cathedrals are essentially churches, right? They're churches. Another word for churches could be mosques, could be temples, right? Those are all kinds of things. And have people ever heard that our bodies are temples, right? There are bodies, there's a phrase that the body is the temple of the soul, right? So there's a sense, so this idea of cathedrals is also a physical building, but it's also us. In a way, we as human beings can be a cathedral, and that we as human beings can have spiritual experiences, right? Experiences that, whether you consider it a realization or something like an aha, you've heard an aha moment, that aha, now I get it, moment that us as human beings can have those kinds of experiences. And that's what happens inside of this story, right? The cathedral is a symbol of that. So let me, in 1 second, let me go to the story, and so I can share a little bit about the story. All these in here. So let me make this bigger. I mean, you can't see it right now. I'm going to read the ending from page 7, and bring you over here so we can read ending. And I want to talk about a lot of things that happen in this ending of the story. Just share screen. Okay, so I'm here on page 7 when he says, the blind man asks him to use paper and pencil to press really down on it hard so that he can see it, right? So I'm starting from here. He ran his fingers over the paper. He went up and down the sides of the paper, the edges, even the edges. He fingered the corners. So I want to just stop at that one paragraph because we're talking about how he has a minimalist style of writing. So if you look at this little tiny 3-line paragraph, has 1, 2, 3, 4 sentences, right? 4 sentences really, and really short ones, right? He ran his fingers over the paper. He went up and down the sides of the paper, the edges, even the edges. He fingered the corners. All right, he said, all right, let's do her. He found my hand, the hand with the pen. He closed his hand over my hand. Go ahead, Bub. Draw, he said. Draw, you'll see. I'll follow along with you. It'll be okay. Just begin now, like I'm telling you. You'll see. Draw, the blind man says. So these two guys, right, who were almost estranged, are now having this very intimate thing. And if you can imagine, right, let me come back into the class a minute. So if you can imagine that his hand over the other hand, and the blind man is like touching, they're touching as they're drawing, as they're sitting there drawing, they're like doing this, right? This because in a few minutes the wife wakes up and she's like, what the hell's going on, right? But so like these two men who are almost like undercurrent fighting, right, are now doing this other thing, right? I'm going to share the screen again, right? So I began. First, I drew a box that looked like a house. It could have been the house I lived in. Then I put a roof on it. At either end of the roof, I drew spires. Crazy. Those are those pointy things, right? Well, he said, terrific. You're doing fine. He said, never thought anything like this could happen in your lifetime, did you, Bub? Well, it's a strange life. We all know that. Go on now. Keep it up. I put in windows with arches. I drew flying buttresses. I hung great doors. I couldn't stop. The TV station went off the air. I put down the pen and closed and opened my fingers. The blind man felt around over the paper. He moved the tips of his fingers over the paper, all over. what I had drawn, and he nodded. Doing fine, the blind man said. I took up the pen again, and he found my hand. I kept at it. I'm no artist, but I kept drawing just the same. My wife opened her eyes and gazed at us. She sat up on the sofa, her robe hanging open. She said, what are you doing? Tell me, I want to know. I didn't answer her. The blind man said, we're drawing a cathedral. Me and him are working on it. Press hard, he said to me. That's right, that's good, he said. Sure, you got it, bub. I can tell you. You didn't think you could, but you can, can't you? You're cooking with gas now. You know what I'm saying? We're going to really have something here in a minute. How's the old arm? He said. Put some more people in there now. What's cathedral without people? My wife said, what's going on, Robert? What's going on? Robert, what are you doing? What's going on? It's all right, he said to her. Close your eyes now. The blind man said to me, I did it. I closed them just like he said. Are they closed? He said. Don't fudge. They're closed, I said. Keep them that way, he said. He said, don't stop now, draw. So we kept on with it. His fingers rode my fingers as my hand went over the paper. It was like nothing else in my life up to now. Then he said, I think that's it. I think you got it. He said, take a look. What do you think? But I had my eyes closed. I thought I'd keep them that way for a little longer. I thought it was something I ought to do. Well, he said, are you looking? My eyes were still closed. I was in my house. I knew that, but I didn't feel like I was inside anything. It's really something, I said, right? And there it is. There's no more. It's all blank after that. It's really something, I said. So it's this whole ending, right? He says it's really something, but his eyes are still closed. He still has his eyes closed. He's learning to see differently, right? He's learning to have a different kind of experience. And at least I think Magdalene said it, she thinks he's going to be a better person after this. We hope, it's hard for people to change unless you meet more than just an epiphanic moment to do a change, but it's the beginning of a change, right? Or the possibility. And that's the beautiful thing about fiction. Fiction is offers possibilities, right? That this person could have this other experience and possibly have this big change, right? Have this big transformative experience with writing, with drawing in this case. And that the fact that they're drawing cathedrals, they could have been drawing a hospital, they could have been drawing anything, but of course, the same way poets are very intentional with the words they use, right? Of course, fiction writers are also being very intentional with all of the symbols, all of the motifs, all of the things that they're using to tell a story. So of course, he picks a cathedral. And again, because cathedrals, it's not just a church. He could have said, it could have been called church, but it's called cathedral because cathedrals, are grand, are exaggerations, and sometimes are very ornate, And so that also is a parallel with the type of experience he's having. There is something grand about having that gigantic feeling. But it's interesting. So you could write about, in a way, when we're talking about characters, right? In a way, the narrator is a dynamic character. It takes him a long time, the entire story, but he does change, right? At least we have the hope of change at the end, right? That there's something different will happen with this person. But when we're doing, if you were going to do a paper, let's say on this one, and you were going to look at those three characters, right? So you would look for examples for, all of those concepts, all those ideas. And I'll, after today's class, I'll take the PowerPoint and put it in the story. There's one there, but I always switch them out because I update them a little bit. The Judge's Wife one is on there. But this one will go on. And someone here in the story, I've been catching up and uploading all of our classes. So you can take a look at them. I'm putting them all the classes in. There's a couple of them. One of them we did not record, and I think it was the one last week, Wednesday of last week, because somehow there's only a little piece of recording. I'm going to go into Zoom to see if Zoom has it somewhere, if there's a way I can get it through Zoom. But yeah, so I'm uploading the classes. So there's this so you would have to support all those ideas, right? And to say that he's jealous, you can find different examples that he's jealous. to say that, you know, examples from the wife, like all of those characteristics that we wrote, you don't have to do all of those, right? But all those characteristics, you would find examples from the text. These characters are so rich, and you saw that I wrote that we had, you know, several descriptions, you know, descriptors, right? Saying that somebody's blind is probably not enough, but saying that somebody has deep insight, you find different situations, right? To saying that the character drinks a lot, you know, you can give examples of many examples of them drinking alcohol and how they're behaving. So you have to think also, right? I think we counted, they think they drink like 9 drinks throughout this story. And they also smoke pot, right? At some point. So by the time he's drawing and doing all that stuff, he's also, they're both also under the influence of alcohol and marijuana. They use the word dope, but it's marijuana. And we know that that also, one of the effects it can have, that can lower inhibitions. So it also could contributed to them going into this place, right? Going to this intimate hand over hand place to be able to draw together. Let me just make sure I'm covering everything with the PowerPoint. But I like to talk about those aspects as well, so that you get a sense of the ways in which you can work on your next essay. There's different ways you can look at a story. So in this story, we wanted to do we wanted to do an aspect of the dramatic arc, right? We know the climax comes right at the end, right? And the climax is also an epiphanic ending. You can talk about that as another theme, as an epiphanic ending. So there's lots of ways in which you can write about any of the stories that we're reading, right? If I rewind for a little bit, we talked about characters in The Judge's Wife. We talked about characters in One of These Days. We talked about the characters, and weren't so many, but talked about characters in Sticks. I'm just trying to review all the stories we've read up until now, and that we've had the opportunity to look at that. We've talked about themes in some of them. And this one, I started going a little technical with the idea of a motif, or the idea of a symbol, right? So there's all different ways that we talked about poetry, and so we can talk about fiction as well, that we can see some of these techniques and these elements at play. All right, I've been talking a lot. I'm going to pause. Questions? Are people with me? Is everybody on the train, or are people like hanging out on the platform? Thumbs up. Okay.
I'm here.
All right, good.
We're here.
I just want to, as soon as I go fast, and I just want to make sure I can slow down or stop sometimes, just to make sure, in case any of you have questions or you're following what I'm saying, because I just rattled off symbols and motifs and characters and themes and just, you know, this stuff. So, but I want you to start thinking. We don't have to, I will over the next, before our next class, definitely, the next class, we're going to do 2 things. We're going to go over the story Forgiveness, but we're also going to go over the, because I would have reviewed all of The Judge's Wife. So we can now talk about how you handle that mini assignment and see, and you'll have my feedback, and then we can talk about it, and we can see as we're preparing to write the next essay in a couple of weeks. So what I want to do, pause with Cathedral, and if there's any questions, please ask. And if you have questions next time we meet, let me know, but I'll pause for a moment. Yes.
Okay. Once we submit a job, like any of these jobs, can we bring it back and add to it once it's submitted, or no?
Say that one more time. You mean the assignment?
Mm-hmm.
So like an example, so for example, the Judge's Wife that you did last weekend. So so I'm going to review them, right? And that's kind of like a mini essay, right? So what I want to do is, because a lot of times you've written one, I want to just say this too, that today's Wednesday, a week, that if you want to revise your poetry essay, that you should submit it by the end of class next week, Wednesday, whatever day that is, 27th, I think. Right, I was going to send that out to folks because people asked, right? Yeah, the 27th. So if any of you are thinking of doing a revision, or any of you are required, because some of you have met with me, to revise your poetry essay, it'll be due October 27th. That's when the poetry essay will be due. So that's in a week. So, so I'm going to say that. Now, getting back to the assignment on Monday when we talk about the judge's wife assignment, which is kind of like a little mini essay, an exercise on it. So what I'm looking for is seeing, like, do you remember to format it properly? Because that was one of the things that we asked. To look at that introduction and to see if the thesis statement is present, right? And check your body paragraphs that you do. So I'm going to review it. And if you decided that you wanted to revise that and then add to it to make it your poetry essay that's going to be due, let me not distract myself with trying to find the syllabus. You could take that and expand it to do that. If any of you, when we looked at the theme of power with one of these days, if any of you wanted to take those 2 paragraphs and use them as the foundation to begin to write a story about one of these days, or you can say, maybe I want to explore power. How does it look in the characters of one of these days? How did power look in Isabel Allende's The Judge's Wife? Because that's certainly a theme of power, right? The judge had power, Nicolas Vidal had power, even Casilda had power, right? We discovered that they all had power, right? So you could look at how power looks in 2 different stories, right? So, what was I going with all of that?
My question was, if I wanted to bring Cathedral back, can I? So I can add to, and how?
What do you mean bring Cathedral back?
Because I wrote the assignment that you asked for Cathedral, but I would like to change some things.
Yeah, if you did like talk about the ending, like in it, you could use whatever you wrote, and I'll upload it. So if people did it, I'll open up a window, and we can consider that. Well, now here everybody's going to do it retrospectively. We can consider that an extra credit assignment if you did it. Only since I didn't put it up, and since Johnny did it, I was going to leave it alone. But if any of you went ahead and did it, I'll open up the window, and then just remind me. I'm going to write a note for myself that if you uploaded that, this particular time will count toward extra credit. I'm going to talk about extra credit since I mentioned it. It's not as a curse word, and some of these class people are like, "Wait, professor, tell me it." I'll tell you how it. I'll remind you how it works. So yes, you could take that and decide, oh, I want to expand this and work on this to be my essay on this story. All the assignments really could be seen as seeds for a bigger essay, right? So even the mini essay on The Judge's Wife, that is not a full essay because it's, it should be, 3 to 4 pages. But so that means you just have to find more things to talk about in the story, right? And The Judge's Wife. And just based on our discussion, there's so many things you can talk about with the story. Now, of course, if you're going to organize an essay has to have an organization, so it can't be random things. That's why I said, if you're going to look at power, you could say, well, I could say, I'm going to look at 2 stories and how power, works, and then maybe have some kind of conversation, like, what do you think are similarities or differences with how power looks in the 2 stories? Yes, so certainly you can do that. Any other questions? Wow. I miss being in the classroom, just so you all. Did it drop out again? The sound?
Yes. Oh, no, it went back. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to do a little bit of an intro to forgiveness. So for next week, and this time I will we'll have the question because I was trying to do it before this class. So we'll do a question on forgiveness. And I'll tell you what the question is, so it's not a mystery. So I'm going to have you read the story called Forgiveness. It's by a woman named Rebecca Brown. And I'll just say Rebecca Brown was my professor a long, long time ago. But so this story appears in a lot of anthologies, and it's a story I'm going to tell you. I'll tell you about Rebecca Brown. She's considered a writer. They call a writer American Gothic. There's a Gothic writer. What is Gothic writing?
Does it have to do with like a time period? Or
Gothic does sometimes refer to a time period. Not always. In this case, when the term of American Gothic, has a different connotation, a different meaning.
Is it like a dark type of poem or meaning?
Yes, it definitely deals with the realm, like within in the ideas of darkness, right? It could be darkness in terms of feelings, darkness in terms of the theme, the idea, right? Um, Usually another aspect of Gothic, sometimes there's something gruesome to it. There's a story that we used to read. I used to read a lot. And I don't know, maybe we'll read it. Oh, maybe for fun. Maybe we'll do it next week on Wednesday. And it's called The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. And it's a story where, where somebody basically kills somebody else, and then they feel really guilty and they give themselves up, right? So there's something usually gruesome, something could be like murderous, something that could be dark, but I think also thematically deals with darkness, right? And so, and have you heard about, like human beings that, I mean, as human beings, as people, we're good and we're bad, right? We do good things and sometimes we do bad things. Maybe some of us do more good things than bad things. Maybe some of us do more bad things than good things, but that everybody does some good and some bad. So usually a lot of the Gothic stories sometimes deal with the dark of who we are as people, right? Some people call it the shadow. Like what is your shadow, right? So Rebecca Brown has written several short stories. We'll do a PowerPoint and go through the whole thing next week with it, but I want you all to read it. And in that story, there is a very powerful symbol, and that's what your question I'm gonna ask you to answer, is to say, to talk about what that symbol is in the story, right? So we're gonna look at so I'm giving you a heads up. If you've read it already, you kind of know what you might know what I'm talking about, but if not, you will do it. In fact, what time is it? Oh, good, we have time. So let's start with forgiveness, and I'm going to read a little bit of the beginning of forgiveness so that we at least get a little bit of a heads up of what forgiveness is about. So again, for all of these short stories, you can go to our class, and in course content, there's a fiction folder and it's there, right? And so here we go. I'm gonna share my screen with all of you, and I'm gonna read a little bit of it, and then we'll be done. And you can read the rest of it, right? There's a little bit of information on Rebecca Brown. She was born in 1956. She's still alive. So how old is she now? I don't know. She's like in her 60s, right? So here's the story, Forgiveness. Big. When I said I'd give my right arm for you, I didn't think you'd ask me for it. But you did. You said, give it to me. And I said, okay. Sorry. There were lots of reasons I gave it to you. First of all, I didn't want to be made a liar of. I had never lied to you. So when you reminded me that I'd said it and asked me if I really meant it, I didn't want to seem like I was copping out by saying that I'd only spoken figuratively. It is an old saying after all. Also, I had the feeling you didn't think I would really do it, that you were testing me to see that if I would, and I wanted you to know, I would. Also, I believed you wouldn't have asked me for it unless you really wanted it and needed it. But then, when you got it, you bronzed it and put it on the mantle over the fireplace in the den. Now stop there. Right, so if you look at that little beginning, it starts with an old saying, right? Has anybody ever, you've heard that, like, I love you so much, I will give my right arm for you. I love you so much, I'll give my life for you. I love you so much, baby, I will take a bullet for you, right? Have any of you heard those phrases, right? So what Rebecca Brown is doing in the story, she's taking this figurative phrase that people say to each other, right? Usually, I'm gonna leave gender out of it, that people say to each other, right? And she's taking this figuratively and making it literal, right? So she makes it a literal thing that this couple have done. So I hope that was enough to whet your appetite and say, what the hell? I gotta read this story now. Right? And I figure, Halloween's coming up. it's a perfect kind of Gothic story to be reading as we're entering the Halloween season. Okay, so so look for the so I'll do the prompt. The prompt is going to be a paragraph on the symbol, right? In the story, like to describe what and I'll give you the heads up what the arm symbolize. What does the arm symbolize in the story? In many ways, the arm is this powerful symbol. It's going to mean a lot of things. It's not going to just be one. It's not going to mean one thing. I'm going to ask you to see how many you can, what does the arm symbolize in the story? And you should come up with at least 2 or 3. I'm going to say I think this is at least 3. At least 3 meanings that the arm symbolizes. That's it. Okay, any questions on what you have to do for next Monday? You have to read the story. You have to respond to the prompt. The story of forgiveness.
You got it.
Yeah, and it's a story about a relationship. So you'll see that as well. So I'd be curious to see what you all think when we get back. Okay. So,
especially us women, how we get about stories like that.
be interesting. I said I was leaving gender out of it because I think it could go either way. But yeah, definitely to see, because I think, well, here I go. I want to talk about it now, but I'm not. I'm going to wait till Monday, and after you've all read the story, and then we can have a delicious conversation as we normally do in this class. So I love all of you when you unmute and participate and you put stuff in the chat and all that stuff. So I appreciate that. Okay, so I think that's all I have. What time is it? Also, we'll end a little early today, so you get a little bit of a break. What's today? Today's Wednesday. Have a great weekend, and then I'll see everybody on Monday. And I'll hang out here if anybody has questions. I'll just hang out for a little longer. If not, have a good night.
All right, Professor. Have a good night. Good weekend.
Okay.
Bye bye, everyone.
Yeah, enjoy your new place.
Thank you.
Thank you,
I can
Professor.
invite-
Have a
If you
good day.
want, all of you can come to my house one day. I can invite you, make an open invitation for all of you.
All right, Jacqueline. Take care, Jacqueline. Take care, Maila. I'm not talking to you, Maila.
Bye bye.
Jacqueline's talking in the chat. All right.
Bye,
Bye,
Professor.
Francesca.
Good night.
Bye, Maila. Yes.
Hi, Professor. So
Hey,
it's Caesar. So for the assignments, like for the one of these days, like I turned that in. Did you already go over the whole classes?
No, I'm going to use this weekend to catch up not only on the judge's wife, but on any loose ends.
Okay, so then perfect. Okay, so then I'm good.
Okay.
All right.
Have a good night.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Yeah, again, Professor. So what I don't think, maybe I didn't understand you. When you submit a job to Blackboard, can you hear me? Am I able to bring it back or no?
What do you mean bring it back?
Like, let's say if I wanted to open the document, the one that I submitted, can I just, because I was,
You should be able to open it again.
I try to, like I'm in my work, and when I press on the file that it says the name of the file, it opens up, but it's not allowing me to do any changes to it.
What do you mean? It opened like what? If you submitted it as a Word document, or you wrote right into the thing?
No, I submitted it as a PDF file.
Okay. So, and then you originally wrote it how?
I wrote it on my no, in my document Google Docs.
In Google Docs, okay. Yeah, I think because once you save it as a PDF, you can't edit the PDF.
Okay, so if I press collapse all, would it collapse it and then I'm able to repost it?
No, you could just, if you wanted, let's say you posted something, you're like, oh, damn it, that's not the one I want. You could either post, you could do another thread and just say, hey, professor, disregard the previous one. This is the one I did. Or, and the one that you typed, the one you uploaded, you should be able to reply.
Okay.
If you reply, that lets you upload something else and you can write a note, use this one instead, and that way it'll be in the same one.
Okay. Thank you, Professor.
Sure.
Have a good weekend. I
All
mean,
right, you too.
the rest of the week.
Yeah, I know. We'll see.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Do any of you have questions? All right, then. Have a good night.